Welcome to Leadership, the Secret Sauce, the podcast where we talk to extraordinary coaches and leaders to dive into the realms of leadership and coaching. We're your hosts, Dave Lipsky and Matt Dodson. So let's jump in with another guest and find out their answer to the question, what is your secret sauce? All right. Well, welcome. We are starting a new series of podcasts today on our coaching culture models that Dave and I originally did years ago. And we're going to describe the 5 different models that we see in organizations. And so we hope you find some value in this. We hope if you identify your particular organization, at least you'll listen to this one, maybe a few others to see what really is possible and our take on the different organizations and what describes that particular coaching culture. Dave, what's the first model that we're going to talk about?
Yeah, we are going to start off with the startup model, Ad-hoc. And in this model, it represents the minimal amount of structure where coaching decisions are made closest to the point of impact, right? Individual leaders contract with coaches based on peer recommendations, with manager approval based on immediate need. And I kind of like in my head, I kind of call this a little more of the Wild West model, where or people are seeking out the things that they need. There's some good activity that occurs as a result of it, and then some challenges to the culture. So what Matt and I are going to do is we're going to ask each other some of the questions that we've received over the years around coaching culture, and we're going to relate these questions to the particular model we're talking about. So in this one, we're going to be talking about that startup ad hoc culture. So Matt, first question.
Go ahead.
What have you seen work and fail when organizations rely on peer recommendations for coach selection?
Well, Dave, you kind of describe it. It is a little bit of the wild, wild west where anybody hangs a shingle and is a coach, and they are brought into the organization. No real thoughts for maybe even ICF or EMCC standards, nothing like that. They just sort of bring in whoever they like. And at this point in time, most people will be calling themselves a coach because that's what the leader thinks that they want. I also thought of something as you were talking related to the ad hoc model. What happens is someone will work at a previous organization and they have had coaching. Oftentimes it's not the democratized coaching like Better Up, Coach Hub, Ezra, anything like that, Korn Ferry. They have had an experience with a coach, maybe a life coach, maybe not even executive coaching. And they move to a new organization and the HR manager says, hey, we do coaching here. We support coaching. And they think, I'm going to go get my friend or something like that. That becomes their coach. So what about you, Dave? Anything that you've seen work or fail in organizations like this?
Yeah, I think, there is a part of it that, more organic than organized. I always think of where, since some of the studies show that 80% of coaching is based on referral, right? The natural flow is that somebody refers somebody else as the coach. There are good and bad implications, as you had mentioned, with that. And I think I think for me, it's a loss of opportunity, mostly, with being able to like structure it, connect it back to other feedback, other initiatives, build it into the system, make it more sustainable. I think is a part of that.
Yeah. Dave, how would you advise companies or people who are kind of in this, hey, I think I need a coach right now? How would you advise them to either get out of that mindset or to really sort of get the best thing that they can?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think it's, the principle of meeting the client where they are, right? Of like, if somebody has energy around something, as a coach, you want to be able to help that individual utilize that energy, tap into their potential to kind of move forward. So you don't want to lose the opportunity. And then at the same time, it's reactive can be non-sustainable, right? And sometimes you're doing things for the not as valuable reasons as you could make it more valuable, right? So you want to move towards more value creation. So the conversation would be to talk about what are some of the longer term goals, right?
Mm.
To meet the immediate need, but how do you change it to just a short term focus to a mid term and then the long term focus? How about you, Matt?
Well, I was just thinking as you were saying that, one of the things that happens in an ad hoc environment is the coach is not connected to the organizational goals. They are just there, um, and that's fine in an ad hoc model. But you want at least the coach to understand, like, hey, this is where we're going. These are the behaviors that we're embracing. These are the organizational goals. This is how things are changing, especially if there's disruption in the organization. You want that coach to be able to support that, not to modify the coaching conversation, but to just have in the back of their mind, this is what we're targeting. So,
Yeah, I think that's it's a nice shift, right? You're not putting the hand up, but you're inviting the conversation. So that's what I
yeah,
heard when you said that.
yeah.
All right, next question. In terms of what are the hidden costs of this informal approach that leaders don't initially see?
Um, I would say probably the biggest thing is alignment between all of their various coaches. So the other one that is oftentimes not seen in an ad hoc model is that the forever coaching, where they blend between consulting and coaching, and they never seem to get off the dependence on having the coach. Um, and so that sort of continues on. I think that's a hidden cost rather than weaning the leader off coaching or reducing or making sure that it's really targeted. The coach then moves into the consultant world.
Yeah, I really like that, Matt. I just building on that is there is got to be some consistent filter for good practice, good ethical practice, right?
Yeah.
Focusing in on some of the principles of what good coaching is, and also like doing what's right for the client and organization. Like there's some kind of balance there that I think is when people contract individually. Sometimes I feel like that can be done to the detriment of other departments or groups or teams that they could be cooperating more with.
Yeah. So, okay. So an individual manager has their own coaching budget. What are some like patterns that you notice in individual managers having their own coaching budget and finding resources?
Yeah, I think the it's similar to other budget issues, right? The those those who have more, those who have not don't. I kind of changed the quote, but I think it's partly is like if you do normally get budgets for things, and also it has more to do with your skill of navigating your finance process than it does based on the need of what you actually what coaching can accomplish.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. I was just thinking, uh, when a manager has their own budget, oftentimes if they're not using it wisely, or if they're just using it because they've kept the coaching going for however long, or it seems to have expanded into all different other things, um, then they have a coach and the rest of their team doesn't get one, or you haven't figured out a way to like maybe use a democratized model where you're like, hey, look, if the whole team has access to a coach, that brings everybody's skill up, not just the leader.
Yeah, well said. And I think it's like utilization of budget, like that's an important concept, and that brings it to my next question, which is, at different stages of the business cycle, you have more or less budget allocated for development. So, how do startups justify coaching expenses when every dollar counts?
Well, what I've seen is if there's a small budget for coaching, uh, when I've been approached by smaller companies, they would say, "Hey, look, this is what I have," which is kind of interesting. At least they know, "Hey, look, this is what I have to spend. What can we do for that?" And I think it's more realistic. Hey, look, this is not going to be forever. I just finished this last week an engagement. The company is a growth company. It's not necessarily a small company, but we went through 7 sessions. We had an additional 5, and she said, "Hey, look, this is the end, based upon what we have for the budget, and this is how I've seen myself grow over the time." I think that was a really wise way of thinking about coaching because she came prepared, knowing, "Hey, look, there is an end to this. It's not just forever coaching."
Yeah, that's a really good. It's interesting. As you were saying that, it was making me think of, the best evidence for why you need this in a startup in other organizations is your past results. Like, if often people, this is not their first rodeo, not their first startup, and just having a conversation and pointing out, like, well, what did work and didn't work in previous efforts, like when you started something. And often the evidence for, like, the importance of coaching early on is going to shine through. And then the other piece is, I think as coaches, we're not always we're not always marketing first, right? We've talked a lot about this, but I think it's important to be able to show how coaching is connected to the ability to innovate, right? So, like, calling something innovation coaching or team innovation coaching, right? Offering things that are really important and fit the language of different business stages is something we probably can explore a little bit more as coaches.
And Dave, as you were talking, I also thought about, okay, so I'm in a startup and I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, yeah, this is us. We're nimble, we don't have a lot of money, and we don't have a lot of formal programs in the organization because we're so new. Coaching is a way to continue to develop those leaders when you don't have maybe a new leader type of assimilation. You don't have resources for new supervisor training. You don't have those emerging leaders, the leadership forums, future executive. You don't have those, and so what you really have, this is, I think, one of the big booms to coaching is that because it almost feels bespoke development for the individual leader, that's the real benefit of an ad hoc startup coaching model. It can actually give you what you need for a small amount of money, maybe whatever that's a few $1,000s to $10,000, whatever it is. All of a sudden, you're getting those targeted leaders, the development that you are hoping they get, and not having to create a whole learning and development team and everything like that. Um, Dave, what happens when there is no sort of tracking of who's getting coached or why? What happens? That's something that happens in an ad hoc model where there's not a lot of structure. There isn't a learning and development. It's the HR manager. They're it. What happens?
Yeah, I've experienced and seen good, bad results from not tracking, right? And I think it's a couple things with this. One is, um, there's an ROI that we do need to point out, right? And I think and then the other part of it is, activity tracking never floated my boat, right? So it's kind of like, what is success? What are we looking at in terms of metrics that matter? Like, showing up is an activity important, and you need that. People are utilizing the coaching, but what's making a difference, right? And being able to articulate that often qualitatively. And if you don't have a balance of those things, then you don't have a complete picture of how coaching has a return on investment. What do you
Um,
think?
yeah. So there's probably a certain place that you get to where you're like, oh, our whole leadership team is receiving coaching, maybe by two or three different coaches. I wouldn't recommend all the same one. We've got, and then all of a sudden, we just want to know, like, hey, we're investing a lot of resources into this. What are we getting out of it? Who's been coached? Maybe there's a period of time where, and especially in an ad hoc model, you receive coaching for 6 to 9 months to really make this transition. Maybe it's in an innovation stage or something like that. And then you want to come back 6 to 9 months later, and or there's some what I would describe as sustaining coaching, where that coach interacts with that leader, maybe once a month, maybe once every 6 weeks, to see, just to check in, how is it going. And that seems to be, because I don't think we're going to go to the coach and say, hey, how's Stephanie's coaching going, because I don't want to break that container of confidentiality, but at the same time, I want to know, like, hey, what are the conversations that are happening, the themes, so that I know where my organization is at. If I'm an HR manager, or if I'm a learning and development, if I'm a chief learning officer, those types of things. So
Yeah, I'd reinforce that. That's I think it's when we I often hear people say they can't measure things. There's a lot you can actually measure in coaching that's not complicated,
yeah,
right? In terms of the, activity outcomes, relationship.
yeah.
So Matt, I have a friend who knows a coach. I'd like to bring them into our organization. What are the risks of me doing this, and possibly the benefits?
Yeah. Well, I would say, let me start with the benefits, because I'm feeling pretty positive this morning. Um, I would say the benefit is I think I can trust that person, or at least that's maybe some implied trust. If my friend that I trust, I'm asking for a recommendation, and that's where you really sort of see the leader hopefully grow. If it's a certified coach, I know I'm going to get a certain quality, maybe. But that's sort of one of the benefits, is that my leader say, Jerry is going to trust coach um, Sally. And so I'll get that immediate trust. I'll get them starting, more willing to share, more willing to sort of really say, hey, look, this is how things are really going, in order to help that leader. Also, the sort of the downside is now I've entered into sort of the friendship world inside the organization. And what happens if this coach really isn't meeting the leader's needs? Or they are meeting with so and so leader, and then, or the container of confidentiality is broken, because their friend wants to know, hey, how's Jerry doing in coaching, and that leader just, not intentionally, but shares things, and that trust is broken. I mean, I think that's kind of some of the things. That's kind of one of the risks, is all of a sudden you have other relationships. I think this happens also in an internal coach, where other people know that you're a coach for other leaders. I think that can be a challenge, but yeah. And also, I think sometimes the independence of the coach is a challenge. The willingness to ask the hard question because they don't have a horse in the race. I think those are some of the things. Those are the couple of things that come to mind. How about you? What do you, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's first, the positive energy I get from somebody saying I have a coach and I want more coaching. Can we bring the coach in? That's a real, to your point. I think it starts out with, that's positive that people want that, right? And I think in terms of leveraging that positive energy, that people want coaching, and then also, like, the ability to shift that relationship when you do, let's say you go, I usually want to interview that coach and talk to them and then explore whether or not they're willing to shift the relationship where there's an additional stakeholder, which is the organization. And some coaches can do that, and then other coaches have a lot of difficulty doing it.
Yeah.
So I think you can assess that in the questions that you ask.
Yeah. Dave, this is one of the questions that I think is, as you think about this, how do you help a leader, even as a consultant or someone looking at a coaching culture inside an organization? How do you help them recognize, hey, look, this ad hoc approach may be holding you back from getting what you can out of coaching, or really moving from nice to have to really value added in the organization? How do you help leaders recognize that?
Yeah, I think it's part of that conversation of, I think Hawkins talks about like understanding the system that you're in, being able to cut across, you know, just not your own individual need, but also what are the needs on your team and across teams and the organization, and how might you individually have more impact on the organization is a similar question.
Yeah. And I think also the flexibility that you experience in an ad hoc model, and the sort of the, hey, I can get what I need in a moment. What you're giving up is organizational like insight. And so if you're saying, hey, look, I think we want to provide the flexibility and we need organizational insight, we may need to move to the next model, to the next maturity, and have someone take a look at this. I think this is also just to kind of add to, we talk about the different maturities of coaching cultures. And I think oftentimes in describing a mature coaching culture, we miss that we need people sort of looking over, kind of hovering over, or just having some perspective of the entire organization. And there's a resource that should be part of that. It can't just happen. You can't just say, hey, look, I'm gonna purchase 50 licenses of BetterUp. I'm going to use their reporting tool, and that's all I'm going to do. Someone needs to pay attention to those 50 people that are getting coaching. So that's some dedicated resources. And so if you're just like, hey, I don't have a resource, when you move to the place that you're like, I think we need to assign somebody, even part of their job, to look over the resources, you're gonna get a return on that investment in coaching that you wouldn't, as if you were just say, hey, just do what you want. So
Yeah, and I do like the idea of like thinking of this as less to more strategic, and in some ways like more maturity, right? And in this model where we say kind of that startup where you're a little less strategic in how you use coaching, the next model we're going to talk about like moves into decentralized, where you continue the evolution where you utilize coaching in a more strategic fashion, right? And each business unit selects coaching and vendors based on differentiated standards. HR provides some insight, but decisions remain largely autonomous. And in the next piece, we're going to discuss what that looks like.
all right. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this discussion on the ad hoc or startup model, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening. If you love this podcast, please share it with another coach or leader. Make sure you go to the show notes to get all the resources from today's episode.